Hello, Suzanne here. Welcome to Excel Intuition's Nested If Strategy video. I highly recommend you download your own copy of this workbook so you can see all of the illustrations in your own workbook and browse around to the different worksheets. We're going to jump to the Nested If Strategy 1 worksheet. To begin talking about nesting if functions, first we're going to look at the structure of a single level if function. A single if function has three arguments: the condition, the logical test, then the final value of the if function if that test evaluates to true, and the final value of the if function if this test evaluates to false. A single level if function allows for two different outcomes: value of true, value of false. Well, when you nest an if function into an if function, you put it in as the value if true or value if false argument. So in this example illustrated here, if a second if function is nested in place of the value if false argument to be executed in the case that the condition evaluates to false, then we're adding two additional incomes. We've got the value of true from the first if function, and then the value of true or the value of false from the second if function. So basically you can provide x possible outcomes by nesting x minus 1 if functions. We have two if functions nested together here, providing three different outcomes: the value of true in the first if function, and the value of true or value of false in the second if function. This blue box here outlines a development strategy for a nested if function. First, define all the possible outcomes. Then create a table matching the outcomes to the conditions necessary for them. Then draw a flow chart. Then label the flow chart for the ifs, the test conditions, the true outcomes, and the false outcomes. Then define the Excel code for the tests and the outcomes. Then build the if functions, nesting them as necessary. So first we're going to just apply this strategy to a two outcome problem. And we're going to design an if function to deliver a simple rating for a blood pressure reading. It's either going to be above normal or low or normal. So the next step in this will be to carry out defining the outcomes: above normal or low or normal. And then the table with the conditions says blood pressure is greater than or equal to the lowest value in the pre-hypertension stage. That would give us an above normal outcome. Or blood pressure is less than the lowest value in the pre-hypertension stage. That would give us the low or normal outcome. Drawing flowcharts doesn't seem particularly necessary when you just have two outcomes, but it can really help you think through the logistics of your more complex set of if functions when you end up with multiple different outcomes and different tests to get to those outcomes. So I highly recommend getting comfortable with using a flowchart. We use the diamond symbol for a logical test, and we use rectangles for final outcomes. And this oval starts us off. You can also use an oval to end your flow path. So in this case, with just our two different outcomes, we're choosing to have our logical test be if the blood pressure is greater than or equal to the lowest pre-hypertension value. Then that's the test. If that evaluates to true, then our outcome is going to be above normal. If that evaluates to false, our outcome is going to be low or normal. And I made a note here to remind all of us that whenever you have only two possible outcomes, you only need one test. Because if the test for one outcome is false, then the correct outcome must be the one you didn't test for. So in this case, we're testing for the above normal outcome, and we end with that if this test is true. If this test is false, then we know our outcome is the low or normal outcome. We don't have to test for that because this one was false. Now, the next step in the strategy, we label our if function elements into our flowchart. So the first if is up here labeled above this test. But test 1 is the first argument in the first if. True 1 is the second argument in the first if. And everything below the triangle for the test in the first if would be in the value if false argument of the first if. In this case, it's just a final outcome, but this would also be where you would start an if function that you were going to nest into your first if. So we just got 3 arguments here, test 1, true 1, false 1. And we can make a rudimentary if function with those placeholders. If test 1 is then true 1, else false 1. Now we have to turn those arguments into Excel to finish our if function. This illustrates finding the code for the test. If we look in the spreadsheet, we see that we had the systolic reading in a particular cell, and that was I3 in this case. And we have to compare it to a value that we're defining as the above normal range to do our test. And this is a picture of the table that has this value named as cis above normal. So we've got the code for our test is I3 greater than or equal to cis above normal. And then our outcomes are simple text strings. If I3 is greater than or equal to cis above normal, then above normal is the outcome, else low or normal is the outcome. And this was a simple single level if function with only 2 outcomes, just using this to illustrate our strategy before going on to a more complex example. Now let's look at an if function that would provide for 5 different outcomes. We've got stage 2 hypertension, stage 1 hypertension, pre-hypertension, normal, and low. And this is our step 2 of our strategy. We're going to label the conditions. We're going to define the conditions necessary to achieve the outcomes. For stage 2 hypertension, the blood pressure would have to be greater than or equal to the lowest value in stage 2. For stage 1 hypertension, blood pressure would have to be greater than or equal to the lowest value in stage 1 and less than stage 2. And so on. I don't need to read all of these to you, but you can look at them for yourself and see they make sense. At the very bottom, the conditions necessary for the low outcome would be greater than or equal to the lowest value in the low region and less than the lowest value in the normal region. So now we go on to building the flow chart. And this is a much longer flow chart because we've got the first if, testing if blood pressure is greater than or equal to stage 2. If that's true, then we're finished. If it's false, we don't have to test is blood pressure less than stage 2 because it must be, or we wouldn't get to the second if function. But we see that this whole false section resulting from a false for the first test is going to be if number 2. In if number 2, we're testing is blood pressure greater than or equal to the lowest stage 1. If that's true, then we finish. Our final outcome is stage 1 hypertension. And I'm going to scroll down to show the bottom of this if function, the bottom of this flow chart. The flow chart gets down to a fourth if function that tests is blood pressure greater than or equal to the lowest normal. If that's true, then the outcome is normal, else the outcome is low. And in this table, we've defined tests and final outcomes with their Excel syntax, as we've named these different ranges in the blood pressure tables. Let's look at that. In the blood pressure table, this is named DIAS above normal. This is named DIA low stage 1, DIA low stage 2. Over here in the systolic table array, we've got sys low normal, sys above normal, sys low stage 1, sys low stage 2. So when we define our Excel for the tests this illustration is using the systolic range to get the rating for the systolic pressure. If I3 is greater than or equal to sys low stage 2, then we know we're at stage 2 hypertension. If it's greater than or equal to low stage 1, I think that there's a text error here. This should be low stage 1 hypertension, not, this should be stage 1 hypertension. I apologize for that. If it's greater than or equal to above normal, it's in the pre-hypertension stage. If it's greater than or equal to sys low normal, it's in normal, else it's in low. And these are the values for these different elements that we need for our if function. But now when we actually build the if function, we can first just put it in terms of the generic test 1, true 1. Here's our second if, test 2, true 2. Third if has test 3, true 3. The fourth if, test 4, true 4, false 4. But now, when we actually build it out, we have the actual code that we'll be using to get our different outcomes. And I've also tried to label this to show you how the first if function contains all of the others. And we can scroll to the right to see this more clearly. So at the end, that very first if function has 4 parentheses at the end because each of these if functions has to be closed that are within it. So now we can go back to the completed example and see here. This is an if function with 5 different outcomes. For the systolic blood pressure. And we have the parallel to this for the diastolic blood pressure. Thank you.